Holly, I have been looking forward to this for so long. Thank you so much for agreeing to be part of creating space. And I know that I think I can speak for all of us, not just those in attendance today, but for all of us, with such gratitude for the words and music that you spoke, that you've been speaking for us in so many ways, and to put it in your own words, inviting us all to the best of humanity, the best, our own best selves. And so thank you for that. It's an honor to talk to you.
Thank you.
Let's get started. Your songwriting tells stories, yours and others. How did you find music and songwriting, or how did it find you?
Probably more the latter. But I grew up in the country. We didn't have television. We didn't have neighbors that were my age. There was a logger that way and a dairyman that way, you know, but it was quite a long trek to get to see friends. So we fortunately had parents who encouraged creativity and didn't seem surprised if one of us was sitting in the corner making up stories and somebody was on the other side playing music and dancing to it. I've talked to people who said that if they did anything like that, they would get shamed in their families if they were being foolish, or but I could burst into song. My sister could start dancing. And then we had books and we had records. So it was isolated, but our parents did a pretty good job of bringing the world into our house through records and through books, and just through permission to be creative, permission to make things up. And so storytelling, my grandmother also, when she came to visit, liked to read to us. So it was, it didn't feel like an unfamiliar form to me when I began. And a lot of the songs I listened to were songs that told a story. So as well as listening to singers from all kinds of genres, I also was listening to songwriters who were telling a story in what they were doing. And so again, by the time I got to writing songs, which was, you know, I wrote some bad songs in my early days, but when I really started writing songs that I kept, I was probably 19 or 20. And by then I had a pretty good sense that songs could be stories, but the trick was telling that story in 3 minutes, 4 minutes.
Yes, right, yes. And then putting the lyrics to music that made it.
Lyrics, put the music, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So your songs and your influence have spanned generations and spanned social causes. So can you tell us a little how your activism and songwriting evolved together?
I guess when I first started getting old enough, I mean, I started performing in public when I was 8 around our small town. Every garden club, every Seroptimist, every Lions Club, whatever would invite me to sing at their tea. And so I began preparing and performing, and also learning to make some kind of a connection. Like if their theme was south of the border, I would look it up in our encyclopedia. Do you remember encyclopedias? And I would find out what south of the border meant. And I would then start going through our record collection to see whether Joni James had maybe sung a song from Mexico and so early on, I kind of did the research and the study to be able to keep the work I was doing relevant. And I guess it began by, I didn't have a name for it, but I really was creating a toolbox of resource, so that I'd put songs in there. And eventually, when I was out in a more activist world, I wanted to never be stuck without a song, without the appropriate response to wherever it happened to be. Even if I was singing from the back of a flatbed truck in the rain with a megaphone, I didn't ever want to say, oh, I don't have my guitar. So I began singing a cappella very early on. Not in anticipation of this, but because I was outdoors a lot and wasn't carrying an instrument. And I loved singing so much more than I loved playing an instrument. But by the time I got involved in doing activist stuff, I had an instrument that could work without any accompaniment and oftentimes without a sound system. So that was really fortunate that
Interesting.
I had that background that led me up to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So talk a little about the social causes and how they've all, like I said, you seem to have spanned. I think that's one of the things people say. You weren't certainly involved in the peace movement and the women's movement and in so many other ways. And I know we spoke a lot about South America as well. So how did you do all that?
Busy. Well, let's see. First of all, the span of time, I've been doing this as an adult for 50 years. I'm almost 72 and I started when I was 20 or so, not counting the Seroptimus Club and the Lions Club before that. And I wanted to be a Broadway artist. I mean, I really wanted to go to New York and sing Broadway material. I had that kind of voice. And I was interested in theater and dance, and that was the place where that all got hooked up. But the social movements of the time, in particular, the resistance to the war against Vietnam and other countries in Indochina, caught my attention. And so I started moving in that direction and did what I guess I would call active noticing. Trying to pay attention to moments, things that were happening, and pull out the theatrics of it, because our lives are very dramatic, and you can tell a story like that and think your life isn't all that important, or you can tell a story like this and go, wow, that was interesting. Right. And so I led towards trying to write theatrical material, even if it was a 3-minute folk song, about what was going on around me. And the exhaustion of trying to keep up to all the issues that you're sort of speaking of was very discouraging to me. And I thought, well, I either have to come up with another solution or be disappointed. And I started getting rid of the word issues. I started getting rid of the word, what are your causes? And as soon as there was no cause and no issue, then it all became one thing. It all became that I wasn't being divided up into all these different bits and all these meetings or whatever. It was that there was feminism in the anti-nuke movement. I mean, there may not have been, but I was going to bring it to that. I was not going to go into the anti-nuke movement without bringing my feminism or my awareness of disability or my awareness of what was going on in the Philippines. So I kept bringing it together for myself so that I had the energy to do it and not feel like I was torn to bits. And I remember a woman saying to me one time how disappointed she was that she couldn't participate more in the anti-apartheid movement because she was 24/7 staffing a women's shelter. And I said, well, I don't know if this works, but why don't you just try making sure there's no racism in your shelter? And if you're doing that, you are doing anti-apartheid work. Right. So it's like, instead of feeling like you're torn into bits going out into the world, I just kept bringing the world into me. And that got fatter and fatter and fatter and more informed and continues to inform me, but it kept me from feeling torn into bits.
Right. Or feeling like you're never doing enough because you're doing this that's in front.
What is enough anyway? It's kind of an astounding thing. We're on this planet that's spinning through space at an unimaginable rate of speed, courtesy of gravity. And we all get to be here. And what's enough? There's thousands and thousands of years. And we had put these kind of modern, and I would venture to say capitalistic challenges before us. What is enough usually has to do with materialism of one kind or another. Enough doesn't usually have to do with spirituality. So we get set up like, did we get enough awards? Did we win enough grants? Did we reach enough people? Do we have a big enough mailing list? All of those kind of things. And those are real challenges in the system in which we live. But we don't have to accept them as the main criteria of explaining whether our work is successful or how we feel our lives are going.
Right, as the measure of our success. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It takes a lifetime to learn some of that, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, I can sit and watch the Grammys or the Tonys or the Academy Awards and feel, oh, I wish that I was able to get that, you know, that little shiny ball out there. But it only lasts a moment because it's really got nothing to do with what I'm doing. It's just one of those things that we've learned to want that kind of attention, that kind of adulation, that kind of money. And that kind of, it's like a, what do you call it? When you set a goal or not a boundary, I'm losing the word. Those of you who are over 70 know what I'm talking about.
That would speak to a lot of us.
Like it's an unrealistic bar to try to reach. It doesn't have anything to do with the work that I'm doing, but it doesn't mean I don't sometimes feel, you know, that longing for something that I actually don't want.
Right. And that the work you're doing is so much more important, but we're all live in this culture where there's a measure. This is different measures. Yes.
It's a different measurement. Yeah. I can't say that everybody who goes into popular music or classical music isn't doing something important. I mean, they are affecting mainstream populations, and those artists that take responsibility for that, like, that's really, that's equally important, right? Yo-Yo Ma, just because he's not out on a picket line with a guitar, is no less essential to moving forward, to articulate the human experience and how to find the best of ourselves. I mean, he's doing it his way.
Right.
Beautiful.
Your message is that we all do it our own way, and that's what we need to sort of dig into and just experience. Yeah. So Gloria Steinem said yours was her first experience of music that could influence a movement. And people said your concerts and the music were religious experiences. So my question, how does music express your spirituality, your spirit, your inner?
Well, first of all, I have to say that a person could do a really spiritual performance, but if the person out in the audience isn't at a place where they want to receive that, it won't be a spiritual experience for them, you know? So it really has a lot to do with where we are in any given moment, whether we're receptive to something. I heard Nina Simone when I was 18 at UCLA, and it was a time of the Black Panthers, and I went to this concert with what, 1,500 people or something, and there may have been 6 white people there. And one person might have gone, holy dear, I'm getting out of here. This is scary. To me, it was a religious experience. It was life-changing. And it was in part because my parents really tried to raise us with fascination rather than fear. Like, what's fear going to do for you? It's going to turn you into a fascist or a Klansman. Fascination gets us much closer to our biggest, most humanitarian, wonderful selves, you know.
Yes.
And so I'm very grateful to them. But I think if I wasn't ready for that moment, when I was sitting there and she was singing with the most extraordinary rage I had ever heard, a song called Mississippi Goddamn, I would have left also. I mean, you are ready for something or you're not ready for it. Yeah. And unfortunately, one of the things that is a characteristic of racism or sexism or ableism, any of those isms, is whether we have in our upbringing or with our teachers or with our life experiences, whether we have been made ready for the complexities and the astounding characteristics of what it is to be alive on this planet. There's a dance in Alvin Ailey's Revelations, the Alvin Ailey company, dance company, and you can find Revelations online. Amazing piece of work that Alvin Ailey did. One of the first completely Black ballet modern dances, and it has lasted since the 60s when he created it. But there's one piece in it going, I want to be ready. It's a spiritual song. I want to be ready to meet my Lord when I go to heaven. And whether a person is a Christian or a Buddhist or whatever, there is a characteristic in there. There is a question. I want to be ready for this life. I want to be ready to say yes more than no. I want to be ready to do more than not do. I want to know when to rest and not to rest. You know, all of those things that come along. It requires a certain amount of everyday preparation for life.
Yes. So this reminds me
I
of
have
one
no
of
idea
my,
whether I answered your question or not.
well, I think absolutely. I love the answer, but I think one of my favorite songs of yours is the I Am Willing, I Am Open. And it seems as though that captures some of what you just said, or maybe all of it.
Yeah, it's so often I had been asked, well, what are you? Are you a capitalist or a socialist or a Democrat? Are you a anti-imperialist? Are you a lesbian? Are you bisexual? Are you straight? Are you a parent? Are you not? You know, I mean, there's just a lot of things that people want to know. And I understand wanting to know, but there's also a tribalism in those questions. I want to know whether you're the same as me, or if there's something about you I want to be critical of. You know, it's like
I might have put you in some box. Yeah.
Where are these questions? But they're important. You know, it's important for somebody to want to know if you're a lesbian, as long as people are still not being invited home for Christmas and still being given electric shock or being pushed off bridges or, you know, violence in the alley. I mean, these are not small words, are they? They're really big words. But I found over time that I was having trouble answering any of the questions, not because I wanted to hide my identity, because I probably would say yes to all those things. Yeah, I'm all those things, you know. But mostly I came down to the lead line in that song. I said, all I really know is that I'm open and willing. I'm here. I'm paying attention, and I don't really know how else to tell people who I am. I don't feel troubled if they call me a name of their definition. You know, people can define me any way they want.
So similar to the social issues being joined together into this one view of becoming the best of humanity, it's the same thing for your own personal identity, that the sort of categories don't matter. I am who I am, I'm willing, I'm open. And then of course I love the next line that says, I can't be hopeless then. I mean, to be hopeless seems so strange, because if I'm willing and open, it's all available.
Hopeless doesn't take us very far. And the line says it would dishonor those who came before me. But I do want to also reemphasize that these names and these categories are important when there's oppression. They have to be named and identified, and they have to be vigilantly and courageously worked with. So we're sort of talking about a spectrum of things here. You know, we have a full spectrum as humans of where we land every day, and it could be the horrific or the glorious. And there's some choices in there. There's some mornings I just want to put a pillow over my head, and you know, I'm not going to my best self maybe at that moment. It might be what I need. And also I recognize that if I'd had a different education, if I'd come from a different set of parents, if I was in a different country, I might very well have participated in the horrific. I don't think there's a way to know that. I just feel grateful that this time around, I got to be surrounded by people who were in search of education and health and well-being and clarity and unity and solidarity and all those things that aren't automatically available to everybody.
No, absolutely. There's so many questions, but well, it's just now backing up a little, there was a special emphasis in your work on the women's movement, and it was said that you laid bricks down so that women could walk on them. How did you see your influence at the time? Again, I know that your view is bigger than a specific, but it was an important phase in your life, I think.
Well, I'm not sure we knew at the time we were laying down bricks. We were 19, you know, we were just living our lives and going for the passions that we were feeling. But it's a hindsight kind of thing where you see, oh, all this work that people did in the civil rights movement, all this work that people did around feminism or around GLBTQ issues, or all this work that was done by those first brave activists who were in wheelchairs tying themselves up to lampposts or obstructing buses so that there would be elevation into a bus, or, you know, there's just so many stories of people's resistance to oppression. And while you're in the middle of it, I think it's very hard to necessarily see that you're laying a path. It's almost hard to see that somebody went before you that allows you to start where you're starting. You know, that continuity isn't usually in one's mind when you're doing your first acts of disobedience. But in hindsight, yeah.
Yeah, right.
And the groups that the next generation of artists that are out there now who have decided to be politically conscientious, decided to be a reflection of the communities in which they live, they're taking that next step. And they may or may not know they're walking on any bricks, but that's okay because they're laying down their own bricks, you know. Right. That's sort of how it goes.
We have to let go of that was the brick I laid, right?
Yeah, it's best to just enjoy the consequences of one's labor rather than want approval for it.
Right. Oh, that's good. So we're having this conversation in the context of a pandemic and such divisiveness in our country. Talk a little about why creativity is so important in the midst of all this.
Well, I'd love to just say I don't know.
You can pass if you like.
My favorite answer right now. I feel as if art, whether it's a song or a film or a dance, has always helped people through something, whether it's joy or trauma. And I don't know of a time where that hasn't been true. So I don't think we're special. I don't think this particular year has been any more or less traumatic than years who have gone before. It might be new to some of us to be our lives interrupted, but there were a lot of places before the virus where people's lives were interrupted. War sent people to refugee camps. Disaster in the household sent the children to foster homes, you know, all kinds of the children who were held at the border and continue to be. It's just not, when we go back to the potato famine in Ireland, it's kind of what happens on this planet, is that you get some good times, you get some bad times, and you get disease and you get health and you get war and you get peace, and I've worked for human rights all my life, but I have to say, I don't really like humans. I find us to be really an unbearable bunch of people when we're at our worst, or even when we're not. I mean, what's going on in the Middle East right now, and what's going on at the border in Mexico and in Central America, and that the environment and the destruction that's been done by corporations in places like El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras, and people can't grow crops anymore, and they're hungry, and they're trying to come somewhere where there's food, and they're being blocked. And I mean, it's not higher. There's not a lot of high love down there at the border. There's not a lot of high love coming out of Israel, or there's not a lot of high love that's coming out of corporations that are continuing to do terrible things, most of which are owned by US corporations. So when I'm critical of the foreign policy of a country, whether it's the United States or whether it's Honduras or whether it's Chile or whether it's Israel, whatever it is, I'm not being critical of the culture or of the people. I learned this from the Vietnamese. I mean, our country bombed the hell out of them, and they still had a lot of respect and love for people from the United States who were trying really hard to end the war.
Right, for the people.
Toss everybody into one big pile. But it's very hard sometimes to wake up and not be angry at humans for creating the chaos that they're so capable of creating.
back to
And
the
then you have
daily
to
web.
remember all the people who are resisting it and how wonderful they are, you know?
Yes.
And it's
Yeah, right.
this contradiction where I
Pull the
don't know.
pillow over your head, or do you take it off and say, nope, we start
Yeah.
over again? Yeah.
Excuse me, something weird just happened at my
Oh.
screen. I guess it doesn't matter. Anyway,
You look fine to us.
activism, you know, happens in very, it's not always a protest. It's not always a rally. It's not always an election. It's, I mean, speaking of intolerable human beings, people are trying to take away the right to vote. That's just, I don't understand that at all, right? Okay, but anyway, I was in New York City. People have heard this story if they've come to a concert. And a couple was walking across the street, and one of them reached down and hit a 3-year-old child for not walking fast enough. And I was so taken back by this sort of spontaneous violence. And I remember thinking in my head, come on, Holly, do something. You know how to do intervention. Now would be a good time. But I just kind of froze. And right across the street, there was a man with long dreadlocks and a bright colored shirt. And he started dancing in the street and saying, don't hit the baby. Don't hit the baby. I said, yes, that's what I meant to say. I mean, it was the most pure activism I had ever seen. And everybody who was standing around observed that moment. So they took it away with them. But I've told thousands of people that story, right? I wish I could find him to say, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I mean, activism happens in very pure forms without having to be organized, you know? We all have the capacity to make change.
Yes, yeah. So we hit on this when we were kind of having our initial conversation. Talk a little about your work with the Chilean women artists. You've been...
Yes, thank you for bringing that back up. I've worked with Chile a lot because there was a military coup there in the early 70s, and a lot of musicians came to the San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland Bay area to escape being killed in Chile. And so I was educated a lot by Chilean artists. And I did most of my work around Chile in the United States. I didn't go down there. I did it within the solidarity communities in the States. But much later, I did go down, and I started making friends. During the solidarity moment, I knew a lot of men ensembles. I knew Quilapayún, and I knew Inti Mani, and I knew these men musicians who were exiled. But women in Chile didn't have the same kind of encouragement to become political singers, to become part of Nueva Canción. And also, when you're under a dictatorship, you don't have a lot of time to pause and take on sexism. You know, there has to be a unified Chile fighting against a dictator. And then once there was an opening, it's just, they didn't get to have the same kind of women's movement that some people had in other places. And it's not that these women don't have knowledge of sexism and they don't have a resistance to it. It's just that there were a lot of other things that were requiring their attention. But now there's a lot of women who are musicians and who want to start to break the traditions of these groups of men musicians, or the idea that people sing songs that are Chile identified, but not woman identified. So I went down recently to do a workshop outside of Santiago with about 15 really fine women musicians, just to talk about that moment where we move away from being responsible for the unified point of view, to say, if I step outside of that for a moment and think about how would I approach this as a woman if I didn't have the responsibility of the whole on my shoulders, and how, if I could take the time to do that. It was wonderful. I mean, they just started writing songs all over the place, and because there's 6,000 people might come to a rally to oppose domestic violence, but neither the male ensembles or the women singers sang about the subject. They sang Chile solidarity songs, right? So like the song da 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 da, which is the anthem, you know, of in Chile. They sang songs like that they had sung during the dictatorship and during also before the dictatorship during the Allende years. But they hadn't created a female identified song movement, and they are doing it now. So
that's very exciting.
Really exciting.
Yes, right. That's wonderful. So creating space for ourselves is so important. How have you done that? How do you foster your own creativity or keep your own spirit alive?
I'm not very organized. I've heard of people like Alice Walker who says that every morning she goes into her room to write and not to be disturbed until 1 o'clock or something, but I've never had any of that kind of discipline. I write songs on an airplane, in a car. Cars are a great place to write songs. I carry my before a cassette player and now my cell phone recorder. I'm thinking and writing in my head all the time.
Wow.
So I think when I write a song, I don't ever start from scratch. It's already been molded in some way, you know, there's some way it's inside me already, and then it comes out sometimes it's in 3 minutes, you know, it doesn't require any time except to fix, oh, well, this word would be better if that word would be better. I don't try to write songs because I have to. I don't think of myself as a full-time songwriter. And there are times when I'm asked to write a song for a particular thing. I don't do that anymore. I'm semi-retired, but when I was younger, for example, Dean Kaler, one of the students who had been shot by the National Guard at Kent State, and he escaped death and was and he was paraplegic the rest of his life, asked me to write a song for one of the memorials, the second, I think, memorial it was for the students at Kent State. And I was honored and I said, sure. And then I tried and everything I wrote was just awful. I thought, I'm in the plane flying to Ohio en route to Kent and I still don't have the damn song, you know? So I remember saying, what's so hard about this? You're just being so rhetorical. Okay, so these students, they got shot, they were protesting. They could have been me.
That's how you got there.
It could have been me, but instead it was you. So a song came out of that. But boy, it was at the last minute. You know? It's I'm not an organized composer.
But you must find ways, and I know you're living in the woods this summer, so there's ways that you foster your creativity, and feed yourself in that way, rather than so that the songs that are percolating or whatever you said can happen. You know?
Yeah, and I think there's lots of ways to write, and I just keep putting the images in that toolbox I mentioned. You know, if I'm in the traffic and I have the potential to be bored, I might look across the street and see a tennis court with a white person and a black person playing tennis. Now you can just turn away and go, oh, people are playing tennis. Or you can go, it took a civil rights movement to make that happen.
Yeah, right.
I mean, there's a shallow way to look at that and there's a deep way to look at it. And I just think that once we train our minds to take the extra effort to go beyond the obvious or beyond the shallow, we start to be able to put a lot of material in our creative box, whether we're creative artists or whether we're creative activists or whether we're both.
Right. Or whether we're songwriters or poets or artists. It's that paying attention in a deeper way that feeds all of that.
Noticing
for all of us.
Yeah, the imagery of it all.
Yes, absolutely.
I can't imagine being a minister or having to write a sermon every week. I mean, I have a friend who's it was hard on her. She was, you know, in there in her office trying to come up with something every week. Right.
Yeah. So I'm watching the time, so we save time for our questions that I've seen happen. So talk a little about mentors and who's inspired you and the importance of mentoring, inspiring other artists.
Mm. Mentoring happens in a funny way. I was at a summer camp when I was 16. It was a music camp, dance theater and music camp in New Hope, Pennsylvania. And Morgana King, who was a jazz singer, came down. She was friends with the woman who was teaching voice. And I was just sort of sitting we were outdoors and they were chatting, and I was leaning against a fence nearby, kind of eavesdropping, but not even knowing I really was. And she said, started talking about mic technique. And I thought, mic technique? What is that? And I zoomed right in, and she started talking about how she used the mic to move it in and out to create her, to be her own sound mixer of when she wanted it close and airy, and when she was going to belt and pulling it back, and when she wanted, that fluidity that was in her hand as she was singing. I never even thought about that.
Yeah.
But that was mentoring, and she didn't even know she was doing it.
Right.
And all those records that came into our house, I would lip sync to a lot of the women singers and try to experience what it would feel like to have that voice coming through my body. It was great. It was a great voice lessons, whether it was Miriam Makeba or Edith Piaf or Judy Garland or Julie Andrews, or, it was just like, or Patsy Cline. They were all these different voices that they were mentoring. I was being mentored. And so I guess I would say to anybody who's listening, who is an artist, a musician, is that your mentors are everywhere. They don't have to necessarily agree to call you every Thursday at 4, to talk about your career. They are where you find them. They are where you find them. And I've agreed once or twice to mentor people for a little while, but because of the way I think about mentoring, they pretty soon realize that they don't need me. They need to go do the work.
Well, and I think you're also saying mentors don't have to be other musicians. They're artists, they're people who see the world and pay that attention that can help you kind of open your eyes to that different way of looking deeper. Yeah.
Different ways in which people practice, for example. I practice, again, in a very disorganized way. And there's some people who get up every day and they do vocal exercises, and then they approach their songs and they break down the lyric and they figure out what they want to say and how they want to say it. And I have a much less organized way of putting all that together. So one doesn't want to say to another artist, this is what you have to do.
Right. This works for me, but it may not work for you. Right. Yeah. Try out a lot of different ways before you decide on it. Yeah, exactly. It works for writing and poetry as well. So what is your current growing edge? What are you working on or not working on, or what's happening for you right now?
Well, I'm trying to finish a book that I've been working on probably for 10 years. I'm not very interested in it at the moment, but I do think it would be a good idea to finish it. And I will. I think pretty much this summer. I'm about 2/3 through, and I've made a pretty big commitment to say, for goodness sake, even if all I do is put it in the archive, my papers are at Schlesinger Library at Radcliffe. And I don't even feel a great need for it to be published, but I wouldn't mind to put it somewhere where it can be found.
So it's a memoir?
Sort of, yeah. It's a series of chapters. Each are about a different subject. So it's not like this happened, then this happened, then this happened. It's more like, let's see, what's of interest to me. I'm going to write about how I came to understand that. And it's interesting in writing it to have to edit myself so that I'm not, for example, if I'm going to write about Chile, how much do I really have to explain who Pinochet was and who Allende was and who Victor Jara was? I mean, this is not a book about Chile. And how do I write something that nobody else who's writing about Chile would write? Something that was purely my experience with it. Because I'm not a historian, I'm not a political theoretician. There's a lot of books out there about what happened in Chile. Some include Kissinger and some don't, depending on what point of view people are having. But, I don't have to be the person to tell the story of the dictatorship. So what part of what my experience in Chile is interesting, and that's that's not kind of so easy to come up with.
Right.
But I'm going
Yeah.
through the book now, which is mostly written, and saying, well, I don't need to say that. I don't need, the book's getting shorter and shorter every day. I can tell you that for sure. But I hope to hold on to the things that really come out of my experience. Because if I don't have something to share from my own experience, why am I writing a book?
Yeah, right.
Not to be able to do, oh, look what I did and how great I did it. The other project I'm working on is very exciting. It's an archival project about women in Oakland, California, for the most part, and the surrounding areas of the Bay Area, who made major contributions to what came known as women's music. And there's a tendency for people to focus on the Chris Williamson or Mae Christian, Margie Adam, Holly Near, you know, that the early white girl with guitar kind of introduction. And yes, that group of people, we were very brave and we were very good at what we did, but the story tends to stop there. And there's such a bigger story of how feminist music and women identified music carried on. So I was interested in interviewing people in particular from Oakland. So I've done 4 major interviews with Linda Tillery, Mary Watkins, Melanie DeMore, and Carolyn Brandy. And then I've done 10 other interviews that are sort of more like a conversation. And I'm putting them all into an archival website that's designed like a gallery. If you walked into a gallery, the main room will be the main 4 featured artists. And then if you want to go into the next room, you can. If you want to go, you know, you can kind of take yourself into the other rooms. And it's been very exciting to do it. It's been a very good place to continue my work of unlearning my own racism, to catch myself when I'm speaking for someone else. I don't have to do that. I think it's going to be very beautiful when it's done. And that's taken up almost all my time this last couple of years.
That's very exciting. Yes. Yeah.
And they're all such fabulous musicians, and the interviews are so inspiring. And I think it's going to be a wonderful thing for people to discover once we can put it out there. Yeah.
Yes. Did you want to mention the other archival at the Schlesinger Library about people putting in their own, sending you their memories of things?
Oh, thank you for remembering that. Most of the stories that we all have to tell as activists and organizers and as women or as progressive men are not going to end up in mainstream history books. So I think it's really important to leave a trail. All kinds of people have archives all over the world, but mine is at Schlesinger Library at Radcliffe. And I can't put anything in there that doesn't have me in it. But if anybody has a story about their activism or how music changed their life or how they got their town to stop using plastic bags or how they confronted a case in their town that was oppressive to a person of color, police violence or whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. If I happen to be in the story, if I did the fundraiser or a song was used at the rally or whatever, I have an excuse to put it into the archive. And then these young researchers can find it. So if anybody out there has, because so often at my concerts, people come up, I first heard you, you know, they have those memories. But oftentimes they first heard me was at a political event. So if they can remember not only that they were at the concert, but what was the concert for and who produced it and what was the outcome of people gathering around that issue or whatever, you know, really to think back and try to document some of this work. You can do it in other places. It's just I have the right to invite you into mine as long as I show up in your story. And you can send it to me via my my email or my snail mail, which is on my website.
Okay, great. Yeah, great. Thank you. I think that's also a really important effort to keep track of that, because you're right. Who writes the history is the important question there, right?
And so many people say, oh, I'll do it, but they don't.
Right.
So I don't know what keeps people from thinking their stories are important, but they are. When I first went to the archive, she was saying, it took me a tour through it to see, she said, send us everything. Don't you be the judge of what you send us. We'll pull out what we don't want. And I said, well, I'm not going to send you all my receipts. And she said, well, maybe you are. She said, come with me. And we went deep into the belly of the archive, and she pulled out this little notepad and she opened it up very carefully because it was so old. And it said bus, 5 cents, hotel, 20 cents. I said, what is this? And she said, this was the first African-American doctor to go out and take health services into Black communities where they were were not allowed to go to
Wow.
white hospitals. And I got chills. I was weeping.
Yeah.
She said, I'm pretty sure she didn't think this was an important document.
Yes, right. Yeah.
So we don't think our stories are important, but in hindsight, they will, and it's a way to leave a trail.
Right. Yes. Okay. Well, I've certainly enjoyed this conversation, and now we get to some audience participation time. Carrie, let's see, where are you? Do you want to invite people to ask their questions?
Yes, we've got some wonderful questions. So Deborah Stracco, you had a question about music and writing training. Do you want to unmute and ask it?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Hi, Holly. Saw you 20 years ago in Oak Park, Illinois, and you were with Ronnie Gilbert. And it was just an incredible opportunity. I was just at the point of coming out, and I had wandered into a church that was gay friendly, and they were preparing a concert with you and Ronnie Gilbert. And I took my little boy, who is now a flaming activist, and we just listened for, his whole life to your music. But and we even made a pilgrimage to Ukiah, California. You're from Ukiah. Yeah, we did a pilgrimage. So big fan.
I hope you weren't disappointed.
Well, no, I mean, we knew that your spirit was there. But anyway, I just wondered, are you kind of self-taught, or did you do any formal training? Like, did you go to college and music school? Did you have time to do anything like that?
I started taking singing lessons in Ukiah when I was about 8. And it was just kind of a miraculous good fortune that a woman who had been a singer and a singing teacher in San Francisco, her husband had been transferred up to Ukiah to work at a corporation called Masonite. And so she had to leave the city where her life was and all of that stuff. She was of an era where she would follow. And she was so bored in dear little Ukiah that she built a little studio attached to their house, and she started giving music lessons. And I started studying with her. It turned out that she had, when she was in San Francisco, had also been Johnny Mathis's teacher, singing teacher. And so she had left all of that to follow and be with her husband. And I just became the beneficiary of all her boredom, and she just took all that she had and wow, really handed it to me. So that was great. Then I went to UCLA for only 1 year. And I studied musical theater while I was there. I took dance lessons as I was growing up. I took tap dance lessons. I wish I'd continued that. I love tap dance. My parents wanted me to practice the piano, but I had an hour lesson with Connie. That was her name, Connie Cox. Half hour piano and half hour voice. Pretty soon it was 35 minutes of voice and a little less piano. Pretty soon it was 40 minutes of voice and a little less. And finally my parents just surrendered and said, okay, she wants to sing. That's what she wants to
sing. That's great.
For any artists who are listening in who are young, I should have learned the piano. It really is important later on. It's just has been a hindrance for me not to know music theory. And the piano is a really good instrument to learn music theory on. But oh well.
Thank you for your question.
Thanks.
I think, let's see, Regina Bannon had both a comment and a question. So Regina. Are you here?
Yes, well, my comment was, I was so glad to hear you mention the Seroptimists, because when I started as an administrator in the YWCA, I couldn't join the service clubs that my male colleagues joined. And the Seroptimists were there. And that was really important for my own sense of myself in this community. The second thing is, I wondered, my question was, should we put in your archive the way we've adapted your songs, or would that be a violation of some kind of integrity? We've used verses for gentle, loving people, for example, for specific situations.
If you haven't used it in order to support the Klan and racist activities, you will not be jeopardizing my integrity. I remember hearing some women up in, where were they? I guess they were in Scotland. We were traveling in Ireland, and I guess we went up into Edinburgh. Anyway, we were in a restaurant, and they came in and we were asking them where they'd been, and they said, we've been organizing and protesting down at Greenham Common in England, about the arrival of nuclear weapons. And I said, that's great. How do you organize down there? We do a lot of singing, they said. And I said, what kind of songs? And she said, well, we do this one song called We're Singing for Our Lives. Have you heard it? And it was really fun to have them. That song has taken on wings and has flown off on its own, had its own life, and you're welcome to it. They had a verse that called We Are the Witches of Diana. So
I love it. Thank you, Regina.
Hang on a minute. I'm going to, let's see, Bruce with Jane has a question. So I'll find Jane and Bruce can ask it.
It looks like I'm on. Okay. I was going to ask you, Holly, something you couldn't answer, and that is where I first heard of you, but I won't ask that.
Oh, I remember you.
No, the question that for me is a really hard one. It's a hard one for me, and I just see how you pay attention to things. So I'm going to ask you this one. And you've seen a lot of people trying to do good things, and you yourself have been trying to do good things. And I just wanted to ask, what pops out of all the things you've seen? What would be one or two that you see actually did the most good? And off the top of your head, what just jumps out?
Well, I understand that. I mean, I could tell you lots of stories, but I think what I really want to say is that when we fall down, we get up. When you fall down, you get up. And it doesn't matter who it is or what country it's in or what language or what culture, we're going to fall down. The ones that continue throughout their lifetime are the ones that get back up. Mm. And I think it's so easy when the first time you're called a racist to say, I'm not a racist, and then you leave and say, well, I'm not doing that work anymore. But if you let yourself fall down and go, whoa, that was hard to hear. And while you're down there, you go, I want to know about that, because there's no one in the world who wants me to be unlearning my racism more than I do. So what a gift, even if it's hostile, no matter what it is. And I'm not going to burden them by asking them to fix it for me. I'm just going to get back up and say, thank you. I'll think about that. I'll work on it.
Persistence to dig deeper.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks for the question.
Marion Chateau has a question.
Thank you.
Marion.
Hi, Holly. I first heard you in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. You were doing a benefit for a peace group there, working in Nicaragua and then branching into El Salvador. And it was so powerful to have you there. I wanted to ask if you would please just talk a little bit about what it was like working with Ronnie Gilbert. I love the 2 CDs that you put out together. And I have to say, personally, seeing Janet Hood's name on one of them as one of the accompanists was just so, Janet is amazing.
No, she is. She is.
So, if you could just talk about some of those collaborations for a minute, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah. Ronnie Gilbert was working in the theater in New York City with Joe Chaikin and other kind of radical theater people. But she also, prior to that, had worked in a group called the Weavers. And this was a group that Pete Seeger, Lee Hayes, Fred Hellerman, and she were in. And they sang, interestingly, when you go back, the material they sang compared to now was not that radical, but they were considered very outspoken musicians. And they were a great quartet. And I had their records. I had especially the one of the Weavers at Carnegie Hall when I was growing up. And there was this woman who just, with these, they only had one microphone. They stood around, none of these, no monitors and none of that sort of stuff. And you could see their picture on the cover of the album. And she had her head thrown back and she just sang with this huge voice. So I grew up with Ronnie in my house. And when I was doing, I started a record company when I was, I don't know, about 21, I guess, 22. And the second record that I did of mine, I wanted to dedicate it to all these singers that had been in my house helping me grow up and helping me learn to sing. But the list was, it was turning into 100. You know, you can't, I decided that once you get a list that long, you're bound to leave somebody out. So I said, is there somebody you can pick? And Ronnie really came up for me as the voice, the theatricality, and the politics in a way that really resonated for me. So I dedicated it to her. I didn't even know whether she was still alive. And her daughter saw the record and gave it to Ronnie, and Ronnie was pissed. Said, how dare this person, I don't know anything about them, whether their music's any good, how dare they put my name on their album jacket without my permission, you know, all this sort of. So her daughter said, well, you should listen to it at least, Mom, before you get all out of whack. So she did. She started listening to it while she was vacuuming the house. And then she heard this big voice coming out of the speaker. So she turned the vacuum off and she sat down and she listened. And she just hadn't been that fond of the folk music that came after the Weavers era. She hadn't been interested in the smaller sound of folk. And so she recognized the bigness in my voice, and she called me.
That's great.
At the beginning, and we started singing together, and she came to visit at my house in Ukiah, and my parents were pretty thrilled about that, as you can imagine. They had taken us to Weaver concerts when we were, I must have been 8 or 10 years old or something like that.
And then harp. I wore out that vinyl one.
Well, we reissued it as a double CD, which you can now get. We added all the material in that we couldn't fit on the original single. So it's out there. There's a company called Goldenrod that carries all my work, and so they would have that. But yeah, harp was Holly, Arlo, Ronnie, Pete. And, so we went out and did, I think we did 5 or 6 concerts and recorded one of them.
Nice.
You're welcome.
I think we have one more question, Ken.
Yes, I'll let him sit at my spot.
I think he's related.
Hello. Hi, Holly.
Hi.
We were talking, or you were talking about mentoring earlier, and I'm wondering, which artists are you most proud of having an influence on?
Well, I'm a fear I fall into this place of feeling it would sound really arrogant if I claimed having influence on someone. So I'm a little concerned about doing that because they might say, well, she's got a big head. I won't. You're what?
I won't.
You won't. I think that I'm going to put your question in somewhat of a different context. I think that the artists who have come after me who want to try to speak boldly about issues and who want to do it with a very high level of integrity, and they want to do it with a high level of talent and skill. They don't want to just do songs that are 4 bars with 2 guitars. They want to elevate their work up into a high form of music. And not everybody has to do that. There's a lot of different ways to do music. But people who want to do that and have social commentary in their work and want to present it in a way that doesn't lose the cutting edge, but nor does it chase people away. And that's a very delicate balance, and you can't always achieve it. But I would say the musicians who have came after, who saw me do that in trying to bring the anti-war community, the solidarity community, the environmental community, and the feminist and lesbian feminist community, and see where those things were connected rather than where they were torn apart. To be able to people to go to a concert, and one might think they're going to a concert of lesbian songs, but then they learn about Chile, someone who's coming who was an anti-war activist, but they'd never heard about what was going on with transgender people, or, you know, no matter who you are, no matter who walks into that, there's going to be something they don't like, and there's going to be something they learn. And they're going to stick around because both of those are valid ways to experience a concert. And the hope that people will go out of that concert hall feeling better about themselves than when they came in, inspired to reach into themselves to see what they want to do. And I've had artists, next generation artists, as well as my peers, come and hear concerts and tell me afterwards, we study you.
Okay.
We study you. So I can't say that I'm mentoring them, but I think I've been able to be an example of one way to do it. And there are people who, I mean, I remember the couple people at a festival came up to me. There were two women that had really been, you know, wearing jeans and plaid shirts and kind of down dressing, because they thought that was how they would represent the sort of trying to fight off the female standards of the patriarchy, you know, was to not. And they saw me dressed in a nice linen suit, and they came up afterwards and they said, wow, that really made a difference to how people were hearing your message. And I said, really? She said, yeah, we're going to go buy some clothes. You know, you just never know how you're influencing people and for why. And I don't think that was a good idea that they went and buy clothes, but that's how they experienced the moment, right? So all I can say is that I know people have been watching, but it doesn't necessarily mean I mentored them. If you know.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, take back my seat here.
I think we have one more. Could we have time for one more? It's the question we all want to ask anyway. So,
Oh, good.
Carla.
Hi, Holly.
Hi, Carla.
We've met a number of different times.
Hi, Carla.
Over the years, yes,
I just recognized you.
that's all right. I'm curious. What's in the future? Are you making another album, or is there another album in our future of you?
Well, I'm really enjoying not singing right now. I had a big tour planned for the election year, and then COVID hit. We had to cancel the whole thing, which was a real disappointment because we had a great show together. And but it was kind of in my mind going to be my last one-nighter tour. You know, we just went on and on and on. And when it didn't happen, that last one-nighter tour didn't take place. I didn't feel like, oh, I'm going to jump up and create another one after COVID's over to have my last hurrah. I just don't feel invigorated right now to go on the road. It's environmentally really challenging to spend all that money on airplanes and gas. And the one thing about this Zoom world is that we haven't been using up as many resources as we did when we were all out racing around. So in terms of live concerts, I don't know, Carla. I don't know whether I'll go. It's hard on my body.
I actually meant more of a album, not necessarily a tour, but more of you singing and you know, giving us things to think about.
Well, thank you for that encouragement. It's highly possible that could happen. The thing is that I have to write some songs. So it's all dependent on whether I, you know, decide. I don't know right now what I would write about. I'm not for lack of it. It's just that there's no, it's not coming to me. And I've gotten really dependent on it coming to me. I feel because you were all spiritual people, or most of you, I would say, I will venture to say this, and I wouldn't say another company, but I really am a vessel of information that comes from somewhere that I don't always know where it's coming from. When I walk out on stage, my meditation before I walk out is get out of your own way, get out of the way. Let creativity, let whatever needs to be said. And oftentimes I'll say things on stage that I'd never thought of before. And I said, where the hell did that come from? So it's kind of the same way with songwriting. I don't sit down and say, well, these are the issues and I have to write a song about every one of them. They come through me, and not being out and about, I'm not really availing myself to it. So I think first have to make a decision to go back out in the world in some way and be receptive. And then the songs will come. So.
Well, Carla, thank you for asking that question. I know it was on our minds.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's, what is that R&B song? It's out of my hands. You know,
Right.
I just feel like I have to get to a place where my own song makes sense. I have to be able to say I'm open and willing. And then as soon as that happens, then I think there'll be a new record.
Yes, yeah. So
nice to see you, Carla.
And I love that. It's a great thing to end on, that being a vessel, you know, things come through you. We can all hope that more things will percolate as time goes on. But the important thing is that you are true to that voice, message, whatever. So we really appreciate that. Holly, this has been a delight. I can't thank you enough. I was thinking when you said your mother thought the Weavers coming to your house, I think for all of us, it's like, you came to our house today. And we got to talk to Holly Near for an hour. So
that's nice. Well, thank you for the invitation. Really,
well, it was my pleasure. And all of us want to thank you for all you've done. Like I said, you put words and music to so much of what we've all been feeling all these years. So we really appreciate it. And so please join